On August 25, 2024, Hezbollah launched a significant and highly coordinated attack on Israel. The group used a combination of drones and rockets, meticulously targeting Israeli military positions with precision. This aggressive move was a direct response to the recent death of one of their high-ranking commanders, which had deeply affected the group. Hezbollah quickly claimed responsibility for the attack and vowed that this was merely the beginning of their planned retaliation against Israel. The attack involved a relentless barrage of projectiles, some of which were intercepted by Israel's advanced air defense systems, but many still caused significant damage. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, issued a stern and ominous warning in a televised speech. He stated unequivocally that this attack marked the beginning of their sustained response to what they perceive as ongoing Israeli aggression. This sudden escalation in violence has significantly heightened tensions along the already volatile border. The potential for a wider and more devastating conflict in the region is now a serious and pressing concern for all parties involved. The situation underscores the fragility of peace in the region, with diplomatic efforts struggling to keep pace with the rapid escalation. The international community watched these developments with growing anxiety as world leaders called for restraint and dialogue. The attack served as a stark reminder of the volatile and unpredictable nature of the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict, which has a long and bloody history. It raised fears of a return to open warfare, with civilians once again caught in the crossfire and forced to evacuate their homes. Israel wasted no time in responding to Hezbollah's attack. The Israeli military launched airstrikes targeting Hezbollah locations in Lebanon. These strikes marked a significant escalation of the conflict. The cross-border exchange of fire heightened fears of a broader confrontation. The situation remained extremely fluid, with both sides on high alert. Despite the escalating tensions, ceasefire negotiations continued in Cairo. The talks aimed to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and negotiate the release of hostages held by Hamas. However, significant obstacles remained. The ongoing violence underscored the challenges in achieving a lasting peace. The international community expressed deep concern and urged all parties to exercise restraint. Ceasefire negotiations in Cairo faced serious challenges, with diplomats from various countries struggling to find common ground. Despite extensive efforts to broker a deal, key disagreements on critical issues prevented a breakthrough, leaving many frustrated. The talks aimed to address the ongoing violence in Gaza, which has caused significant destruction, and to secure the release of hostages held by militant groups. Hamas, a Palestinian militant group, rejected the latest ceasefire proposal, citing unmet demands and conditions. The group insisted on the implementation of a previous ceasefire agreement, which they believe addresses their concerns more effectively. This previous agreement had received support from President Biden, who has been actively involved in seeking a peaceful resolution. The lack of progress in the negotiations raised serious concerns among international diplomats, who fear the consequences of continued conflict. The potential for a prolonged and bloody conflict loomed large, with both sides preparing for further escalation. The situation remained tense, with no clear path to a resolution in sight, leaving the people of Gaza in a state of uncertainty and fear. The international community watched the stalled negotiations with growing concern, aware of the broader implications for regional stability. The failure to reach a ceasefire agreement threatened to plunge the region back into chaos, exacerbating the already dire humanitarian crisis and leading to further suffering for civilians. Hamas remained firm in its stance. The group demanded the implementation of a previous ceasefire agreement as a precondition for any further negotiations. This previous agreement, which had garnered support from President Biden, was seen as favorable by Hamas. The group argued that the previous agreement addressed their key concerns. They refused to accept any new deal that did not meet these demands. This stance further complicated the negotiation process. Israel's willingness to revisit the terms of the previous agreement remained unclear. The stalemate highlighted the deep mistrust between the parties involved. Finding a compromise seemed increasingly difficult. Section 5. Hezbollah's threat: further action looms. Adding to the tension, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, issued a new threat. He warned of further attacks against Israel if the group's demands were not met. This statement heightened fears of a wider conflict. Nasrallah's warning signaled Hezbollah's determination to exert pressure on Israel. The group aimed to secure concessions and advance its own agenda. This stance threatened to further destabilize the region. The international community condemned the threat of further attacks. Diplomats urged restraint and called for a de-escalation of the situation. The risk of a wider war was a growing concern. Section 6. U.S. monitors situation, supports Israel. The United States, a close ally of Israel, closely monitored the unfolding crisis. While not directly involved in the Israeli airstrikes, the U.S. provided intelligence support. The U.S. confirmed its assistance in tracking Hezbollah's attacks. However, the extent of U.S. involvement in the Israeli response remained unclear. This support underscored the strong alliance between the two countries. The U.S. called for de-escalation and urged all parties to engage in dialogue. However, its unwavering support for Israel drew criticism from some quarters. Critics argued that this stance could hinder peace efforts. Section 7. Humanitarian crisis grips Gaza. As the conflict continued, the humanitarian situation in Gaza deteriorated rapidly, leaving countless families in despair. Israel's military operations in the region resulted in widespread destruction and displacement, forcing many to flee their homes. Civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, suffered significant damage, crippling essential services. The lack of essential supplies, such as food, water, and basic necessities, became a daily struggle for the residents. The shortage of medicine and medical supplies exacerbated the crisis, leaving many without proper health care. International organizations struggled to provide aid to those in need, often facing numerous obstacles. The volatile security situation hampered relief efforts, making it difficult for aid workers to reach affected areas. The escalating conflict deepened the already dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza, with families living in makeshift shelters. The human cost of the conflict continued to rise, with many injured and lives lost. The international community expressed grave concern over the deteriorating situation in Gaza, calling for immediate action. Calls for a ceasefire and humanitarian access grew louder as the world watched in horror. Section 8. Fears of a wider conflict escalate. The ongoing violence between Israel and Hezbollah fueled fears of a wider regional conflict. The situation remained highly combustible, with no clear path to a resolution. The potential involvement of regional actors, such as Iran, added another layer of complexity. Iran's support for Hezbollah raised concerns that the conflict could draw in other countries. The international community watched the situation with growing anxiety. Diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the crisis and prevent a wider war intensified. Section 9. International community calls for restraint. In response to the escalating violence, the international community issued urgent calls for restraint. World leaders condemned the attacks and urged all parties to de-escalate the situation. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting to discuss the crisis. However, no concrete action emerged from the meeting. The lack of a unified response highlighted the challenges in addressing the conflict. Despite the calls for peace, the situation on the ground remained volatile. The risk of further escalation remained high, threatening to plunge the region into a broader war. Section 10. The uncertain path to resolution. As the dust settled from the latest round of violence, the path to a lasting resolution remained unclear. The ceasefire negotiations in Cairo were deadlocked, and neither side showed signs of backing down. The deep mistrust and animosity between the parties involved posed significant challenges to peace. The volatile situation threatened to erupt again at any moment. The international community faced the daunting task of mediating a solution. The recent escalation served as a stark reminder of the enduring conflict in the region. Finding a peaceful resolution remained a distant hope. The need for dialogue and compromise was more urgent than ever.